This time on combat ships, the vessels that operate in secret, unseen by their enemies.
They were fast, and they were stealthy, and they were a small target from the enemy.
From the secret missions that helped win World War II.
After Lightoll's heroism on Titanic and the First World War, he was then a hero again. He took his own private yacht to Dunkirk.
To new technology that offers new ways to hide.
It looks like it could be something out of Star Wars, or it could be actually flying through the air instead of on the water.
Stealth ships stay out of sight in a world where eyes are everywhere. Combat ships. Fast. Effective.
The mission is pure James Bond espionage.
Deadly.
Japan is willing to throw the dice to engage just about every aspect of their military force in a climactic, decisive battle to stop the United States.
They have changed the world.
Warships have been key factors in global history, from the beginning of civilization to the present day.
Thanks to clever design, raw firepower, and the heroism of their crews. Today, military stealth means strange shapes and angular designs. Craft using technology to hide from spying eyes and ears. But even before this technology existed, navies employed stealth tactics to avoid detection.
Every form of shipping at every point in history has had some form of stealth tactics, whether that's operating at night, operating quietly, whether that's how you paint your boat to blend into either the sky or the sea. Stealth's been part of shipbuilding throughout naval history.
One way to avoid detection was to be small and fast. This is the American PT-658. One of only 2 operational World War II PT boats left in the world.
PT boats were designed to be fast and to be hidden and to be very powerful.
PT stands for Patrol Torpedo. Nicknamed mosquito boats, they were small but fierce.
PT boats were unique in that they were the most heavily armed ship for their size in the Navy. So you had an 80-foot ship, 20 feet wide, 80 feet long basically. And from stem to stern, there were armaments. Right on the bow is a 37mm cannon. Behind that is a 20mm machine gun. Just beyond that, 2 30 caliber machine guns. Another 20 caliber machine gun behind that. And then of course the big boy, the 40mm on the very back.
All that plus 4 2,200-pound torpedoes. This firepower was paired with serious speed.
They cruise real well at 45 knots, and that's all because of the engines in the bottom. There's 3 V12 Packard gasoline engines down there.
These engines produce up to 5,550 horsepower, propelling the boat's 50-ton wooden frame easily through the water. The U.S. Navy tested the first prototypes in 1939, just in time for the brand new PTs to receive a baptism of fire. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and the U.S. entered the Second World War. Japanese forces quickly spread across the Pacific Islands.
This struggle between December 1941 and 1945 was overwhelmingly for possession of air bases and safe harbors for shipping. And the Japanese, of course, had seized an awful lot of this stuff right at the beginning of the war, when the United States was almost defenseless. And the rest of the war was really spent getting back inch by inch, and then thousands of miles by thousands of miles, all that had been lost in those early days.
The stunned American Navy had few options. PT boats were cheap, flexible, and available.
They were able to work in shallow water where larger ships could not. They were expendable, and when the Navy did not want to risk major war vessels, the PT boats were there.
To compensate for their size, they used stealth tactics.
PT boats, when attacking enemy shipping, were overwhelmingly dependent on speed and darkness. They had no chance of surviving against enemy gunfire in daylight, so they had to attack at night, and they could dash in and fire and then turn away and get out with luck before the Japanese could get at them.
While the PT boats performed well, their outdated Mark 8 torpedoes were less effective.
It is very difficult, if you're on a very fast-moving, bumping boat, to aim a torpedo accurately from a range of several thousand yards. It was pretty primitive technology. These were not guided missiles.
Sometimes they failed to detonate at all. The heavy deck guns were far more deadly.
As the war went on, they became less important as torpedo boats and used as barge hunters. The Japanese were bringing in supplies and replacements among the islands in barges, which were armored and carried heavy guns, and the PTs went hunting for them.
The versatile vessel quickly became a jack of all trades.
In all sorts of other roles, of reconnaissance, rescuing pilots, all sorts of stuff, they were absolutely invaluable because they were very fast, very light, small crews.
Qualities that would prove pivotal in one of the war's most famous missions. In March 1942, the Japanese were on the verge of invading the US-held Philippines. There, General MacArthur was holding out on Corregidor Island. Commander of US Army forces in the Far East and America's most famous military leader, MacArthur was too important to be captured. President Roosevelt ordered him to escape to Australia. PT boats were given the task to get him to safety.
They chose PT boats because they were fast and they were stealthy and they were a small target from the enemy. You know, they were hard to find.
If the Japanese spotted them, their chances of getting away were almost nil because the Japanese had almost total control of air and sea in the theater.
On the night of the 11th of March 1942, 4 PTs carrying MacArthur, his family, and staff set off from Corregidor. To escape, they would have to slip through a Japanese naval blockade in the dark. MacArthur recalled the tense moment they approached the enemy ships.
We waited, hardly breathing, for the first burst of shell that would summon us to identify ourselves. 10 seconds, 20, a full minute. No guns spoke. The PTs rode so low in the choppy seas that they had not spotted us.
So it was only these tiny little mosquito craft that had a chance of being able to make that dash successfully without anybody noticing, as indeed they did.
600 grueling miles and 36 hours later, MacArthur's PT boat reached Mindanao Island, where the U.S. still controlled an airfield. From here, a B-17 bomber took him to Australia. There, MacArthur made a famous vow.
I said to the people of the Philippines whence I came, I shall return. Tonight, I repeat those words. I shall return.
In March 1945, MacArthur did just that, driving the Japanese out of the Philippines. He decided to return to Corregidor Island on a PT boat.
We had departed in the darkness of a somber night. We came back in the sunlight of a new day.
6 months later, on September 2nd, 1945, MacArthur would witness the Japanese surrender and the end of World War II. Crucially, the United States was able to gather its industrial might, building a massive navy, which included nearly 600 PT boats, doing their part for victory. Even before the Second World War began, ships were used to carry out stealth missions, sometimes hiding in plain sight. Mixed in with the yachts and the cruisers in the small port of Ramsgate in the southeast of England is a remarkable boat with a unique story. This is Sundowner. Sundowner was a motor yacht owned by a captain named Charles Lightoller. In 1930, he bought an old Royal Navy First World War harbor launch and converted it into a family cruiser.
He went cruises all over. He went to Bergen in Norway, he went up the Baltic, he went Holland and Belgium and Germany, and he just enjoyed it.
By the summer of 1939, the Nazis threatened all of Europe. War was imminent. The British government scrambled to prepare. One intelligence agency thought that even an old retired sea dog could play his part in these preparations.
The story goes that suddenly 2 blokes arrived looking rather suspicious, but apparently they were Admiralty fellows, intelligence chaps, and they spoke to Lightoller, told me a little bit about a certain mission, secret mission they wanted him to get involved in. Would he be interested in trusting them and following it up?
Why would British naval intelligence be interested in Charles Lightoller? Because he had proved himself to be a remarkable seaman with nerves of steel. In April 1912, Lightoller was second officer on the most famous ship in the world, the Titanic. Age 38, Lightoller was a very experienced officer.
He was described by his Titanic colleagues as being a hard case, a really tough guy.
On the night of the sinking on the 14th of April 1912, Lightoller was in charge of the lifeboats on the port side of the ship. As Titanic sank, he jumped into the freezing waters of the Atlantic. Later, he would recall,
striking the water was like 1,000 knives being driven into one's body, and for a few moments I completely lost grip of myself.
Lightoller saved himself and others by climbing onto an overturned lifeboat. He was the most senior officer to survive.
The night the Titanic sank, Charles Lightoller's character really shone through. Brave, dependable, capable.
His traumatic experience did not put him off the sea. In the First World War, Lightoller commanded a destroyer.
He was on patrol, and then you saw a U-boat surface. And so he rushed at the U-boat, slammed into this U-boat, and split it, and that sank.
Now, Charles Lightoller was the right man for an unusual stealth mission. On the eve of the Second World War, the British Admiralty had a problem. They had almost no intelligence on the North German coast, the location for a possible major amphibious invasion.
In this period before air reconnaissance, situational awareness, as it's now called, was often quite hard to get. Any information that could be obtained was pretty important.
Intelligence officers asked Lightoller if he would secretly photograph, map, and sketch the coastline of northern Germany. He readily agreed. His wife Sylvia insisted she came too. She could make the mission look even more like an innocent cruise. So in the summer of 1939, the Lightollers set off for Germany to begin their mission.
So we used to go to various bays and inlets and anchor, and from below, through the portholes, so he wouldn't be seen, with binoculars, he used to look at the coast, see what defenses there might be there, and what troops there were, and so on.
As they made their way along the coast, Lightoller also measured the depth of the seabed. Vital intel for any invasion fleet.
Lightoller's mission is James Bond espionage. We need to know this information. We need to send somebody there who can gather it. So he is at serious danger of being caught and arrested.
I think Lightoller would have loved the mission. He'd have loved the tension of it.
For 2 weeks, things went smoothly. Then when Sundowner was moored in Jade Bay, near the major German naval port of Wilhelmshaven, a patrol boat suddenly appeared and made straight for the Lightollers.
Sylvia, his wife, was on the stern doing her knitting, playing her part in this surreptitious operation. Lightoller was below with his binoculars and so on. And she shouted below and gave Charles a bit of a warning. There was something up.
With little time to think, Charles improvised.
See, he came up on deck with a glass in his hand and a bottle of gin in the other, pretending to be drunk. And he fooled about on the deck, making a big show of himself. Sylvia at the stern, looking very disapproving of the whole thing.
The Nazis were baffled.
But then they laughed, and the tension was broken, and off they went. Mind you, at that stage, Lightoller thought, well, who knows what might happen? They might come back at any time, having discussed it with somebody else. So that was the time to go home.
Saved by gin, Sundowner returned to England with Lightoller's bag full of film, soundings, sketches, and details of German gun emplacements. Vital information for a nation readying for war. But Lightoller's service to his country wasn't over. Weeks later, World War II broke out. In September 1939, British troops moved into France. But by the spring of 1940, they were on full retreat from Hitler's blitzkrieg. Pushed back into a small enclave on the coast to a port called Dunkirk. Evacuation by sea was the only option. The Royal Navy quickly devised a plan, codenamed Operation Dynamo.
They have to find means of lifting all of those men off an increasingly narrow beach area with very few port facilities, under pressure, under bombardment.
Desperate, the British Admiralty asked small civilian craft to make the treacherous journey across the Channel to France.
Really, anything that could float was mobilized by the Navy to act as the crucial small craft backup to the personnel ships and the warships.
Once again, Charles Lightoller was ready. Early in the morning of June 1st, 1940, Sundowner left Ramsgate Harbor. On board with Lightoller were his eldest son, Roger, and a young Sea Scout named Gerald Ashcroft. During the journey, German aircraft hounded and strafed Sundowner. Gerald Ashcroft remembered how Lightoller, standing on the deck, skillfully dodged the attacks.
He sung out to go harder port, which we promptly did, and the bullets came flying down the starboard side. The plane came round, had another go. We twisted, we turned. That was the start of the fighter planes.
Somehow, Sundowner made it to the chaos of Dunkirk Harbor. Lightoller wanted to rescue as many men as possible, but the most Sundowner had carried before was 20 people.
We got over 50 down below, and we started filing on deck. When we got approximately 130, Sundowner was so low in the water that we could not take any more.
Troops were brought here, minus the helmets and rifles and boots. All these troops, not so well, of course, they've been under fire for many days. Brought into the main saloon, pushed into the cabins, all lying down flat.
Dodging air attacks and heavily laden with a remarkable 130 people, Sundowner made her way back across the channel. Then, at 10 o'clock in the evening on the 1st of June 1940, she edged slowly into the safety of Ramsgate Harbor. Across 9 days, nearly 340,000 British and Allied troops were evacuated from Dunkirk, saving the British Army from the brink of annihilation. Few now would guess Sundowner's war story.
When we read about and think of naval operations during the war, we do think of the larger ships, don't we? Destroyers and cruisers and so on. But small ships like this one played a very vital part and a necessary part.
Sundowner's exploits along the German coast were only the beginning of Allied covert operations. And one combat ship would rise above the rest when it came to stealth missions: the submarine. By the start of World War II, the submarine was already a feared combat ship with a formidable war record. As the war progressed, the Allies saw potential for more complex stealth missions.
Submarines are ideal for covert work. They would surface for as brief a time as possible, and then you could pop open a hatch and get agents ashore, or bring people off from the shore, or observe the shore, and then get away again very quickly.
One British submarine in particular would become a true stealth specialist: HMS Seraph. Seraph played a pivotal role in 2 critical Allied invasions. Her first such assignment was in October 1942. General Eisenhower's deputy, 46-year-old General Mark Clark, was trusted with a secret mission.
He had become good friends with Eisenhower by this point in time. A confidant, but also somebody who was counted on to go ahead and take care of business.
Clark needed to meet a French general in Algeria, just weeks before an Allied invasion of North Africa.
North Africa is not held by Germans, it's held by the Vichy French. So this is the French government that was set up after France fell in the summer of 1940.
Although the French were former allies, Vichy France was a German puppet state and might resist the invasion.
The Americans and the British hoped that something could be worked out with the French in North Africa, so we wouldn't have to fight the French. They would welcome us ashore.
The mission, named Operation Flagpole, would be a dangerous one into hostile territory.
It's going through the infested waters of the Mediterranean. It's escaping patrols. So there's great personal risk. If they're captured, they could be seen as spies, and of course we know the countless tales of what happens to spies.
On board HMS Seraph, Clark met its young commander, 28-year-old Lieutenant Norman Jewell.
He is a very, very junior officer at this point in time, but he possessed a great deal of confidence about what he could do and what his boat could do in the Mediterranean.
On the 21st of October 1942, they reached the Algerian coast. Seraph waited, submerged, until nightfall. At midnight, the klaxon sounded. Seraph surfaced. Time to go ashore.
The submarine has to get in very close in darkness. They have to extract Clark and his team from the boat, get him into a collapsible canoe, and get him through the surf and onto a beach in a hostile country.
They made landfall and got to the rendezvous without issue. At 5 a.m., the French general, Charles Mast, arrived, and the talks began. If Clark could get French cooperation, thousands of lives could be saved.
There's an initial feeling out process to the exchange between Mast and Clark, but it doesn't take long where they gain almost some mutual trust.
General Mast assured Clark his troops would not resist the Allied forces. Suddenly, the phone rang.
Word flashes in that the police are on the way, and so there's a mass panic, and it's, as Clark recounts, it's as if they threw 40 skunks on the table, and people scatter trying to figure out what to do. Clark and his team wind up in the cellar.
The Vichy police had been tipped off. They searched the house. Clark and his team waited anxiously with cocked guns.
We could hear the police tramping around, looking in corners and behind furniture. Every time their feet approached our trapdoor, 7 hearts popped into 7 throats.
Half an hour passed. Finally, the owner of the house convinced the police there was no one else there, and they left.
Mark Clark decides maybe a better part of valor to leave as well, made his way back down to the beach, trying to get his rubber boat back into the surf.
Only to find the weather had taken a turn for the worse. Lieutenant Jewell edged Seraph closer to shore. Clark later wrote about his perilous escape.
We seemed to be paddling for hours without seeing anything, before we spotted the loom of the Seraph in the blackness.
They had made it back to the safety of Seraph. Flagpole had been a success. Less than 3 weeks later, on the 8th of November 1942, the Allies launched Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa.
Torch is a great success. It comes, relatively speaking, with a small loss of life. They accomplish the objective. They get Allied forces ashore in North Africa.
Seraph's career as a stealth specialist wasn't over. 6 months later, she was ordered to the west coast of Scotland. Jewell and his crew were about to take a central role in one of the most elaborate deception campaigns in World War II, Operation Mincemeat. Once again, Seraph's mission involved an Allied invasion. This time, it would be the first on European soil.
The Allies were planning to go ashore on Sicily in the Mediterranean, but they wanted to convince the Germans it was someplace else, Sardinia, Rhodes, any place but Sicily.
2 British intelligence officers, Charles Chumley and Ewan Montague, came up with an ingenious plan.
They take a dead body, a random man who's died in London. They create the complete false identity of an officer in the Royal Marines. Everything from the obvious things like his uniform and papers, down to photographs of his notional girlfriend. They chain to the hand of this corpse a briefcase containing details of an entirely fictitious invasion miles away in the eastern Mediterranean, a long way from Sicily.
The final stage of the deception required the body, dressed up as a British major with the fake name of William Martin, to wash ashore in Spain, seemingly the victim of a plane crash. Although officially neutral, Spain's leader, General Franco, was sympathetic to the Nazi regime.
To get the so-called Major Martin ashore, you had to transport him to the right place of Spain, where he would be washed ashore. And this was again a perfect task for Britain's most covert submarine, HMS Seraph.
On the 17th of April, 1943, a canister containing Major Martin was brought aboard Seraph. Mincemeat's success now depended on the sub's ability to stay undetected. After a tense 10-day journey, Seraph arrived off the coast of Spain. On the morning of the 30th of April, Jewell and his officers brought the body on deck. Norman Jewell would later recall the moment.
We brought the body out, checked that he'd got his papers and everything on him, and then slid him over the side. Went full astern on the motors so that he'd be pushed in the right direction to start.
With the body floating toward shore, Seraph vanished.
The Spanish authorities, sure enough, found him, brought him ashore, opened the briefcase, photographed all the papers, put them back in the briefcase, closed it up, then notified the British embassy that, oh, we found a British soldier, you can come claim him, but then delivered the photographed copies to Berlin.
And the Germans fell for the hoax, hook, line, and sinker.
Hitler orders extra troops to Sardinia, moved panzer divisions from the Eastern Front to the Balkans, and sent torpedo boats from Sicily to Greece.
Operation Mincemeat is one of the most important deception operations of the Second World War.
When the invasion of Sicily happens, it's not unopposed, but I think it's fair to say it's initially quite lightly opposed, and there's no doubt that Operation Mincemeat was part of the reason for that.
Victory in Sicily was the beginning of the end for Hitler's domination of Europe. The tide was turning in the Allies' favor. Seraph proved that there was no combat ship stealthier than the submarine. But was there a way to build a surface craft with the same stealth ability? To be invisible to radar? The US Navy wanted to find out. Speed, surprise, and the submarine brought naval stealth tactics into the 20th century. But as World War II went on, a new technology threatened to make the old-school tactics obsolete: radar.
Radar transformed the nature of naval war. Before the coming of radar, you had to, if you were an admiral, see physically the enemy's ships. And now, suddenly, with radar, if the enemy was 50 miles away in a fog, you were going to be able to see them through the fog. And this changed the game almost overnight.
A radar antenna transmits radio waves out in a wide beam. When these waves hit an object, they bounce back to the antenna. There, a receiver picks up this information and can establish the object's size, speed, and direction of travel. The Cold War between the US and the Soviets made the need to evade radar even more urgent. America began to look into the possibilities of new stealth technology. Initially, for aircraft.
The reason why stealth technology was necessary is because the Soviet radars could shoot down anything that we put in the sky with complete ease, and with far enough range that they had a huge amount of time to respond with missiles, airplanes, or whatever. So could we design something that was invisible to radar?
In 1975, Alan Brown, an aeronautical engineer, joined a top-secret project at Lockheed's Advanced Development Programs, also known as the Skunk Works. Their goal? To develop the first aircraft with stealth technology. In 1981, Alan's team produced the first operational stealth aircraft, the F-117 Nighthawk.
It could not be seen by the best radar operators in the country, so if they couldn't pick it up, nobody could.
The key was the aircraft's striking angular design. Radar can easily detect a conventional aircraft's rounded aerodynamic shape. An angular design ensured that the waves dispersed in all directions. Carbon particles in the stealth plane's surface absorbed additional energy, making the Nighthawk almost invisible to radar. The Nighthawk's success sparked interest from another branch of the US military.
Very few people were briefed on our technology, and the Navy people took advantage of that and asked us if we could do something that would be virtually invisible in their case.
So Alan and his team at Lockheed created the concept for the first stealth ship, Sea Shadow.
The most logical thing that we should do, we thought, was just make a stealth fighter that could travel over water. And so if you look at the front view of the stealth fighter and the front view of the Sea Shadow ship, you can see that they're almost identical. Same surface slopes, same materials on them for absorption, and so on and so forth.
By now, Alan and his team were stealth experts, but they were not shipbuilders. So Lockheed pulled together a small group of naval engineers. Among them, ship designer Steve Larson.
We were briefed on this program, a secret program, and we looked at the artist's conception, we're going, wow, that's pretty cool. And so we started work in early '83, and they brought this barge up so we could build this Sea Shadow in secrecy.
Even the barge was top secret. Called HMB-1, the CIA built it in 1974 to covertly retrieve a sunken Soviet sub. After the mission, the 320-foot-long barge was mothballed, until it became the perfect floating dry dock to build a top-secret stealth ship.
My role was to design the ship's structure. The designer of the ship didn't know the details, how to put it together. So my role was, we got to put it together like this.
Steve and his team designed the ship section by section. It was assembled on the barge like a jigsaw puzzle. 3 years after Steve first saw Alan's designs, Sea Shadow was completed.
It was about December of '85 when the whole thing was finally put together. I said, man, I wish I could take a picture of that, but that wasn't allowed. So, yeah, it was pretty exciting.
Steve's work was done. It was now time for Alan and his team at Lockheed to put Sea Shadow to the test. Still top secret and hidden inside the giant barge, they moved Sea Shadow to the Channel Islands, off the coast of Los Angeles. The big question, was it visible to radar?
One of the first radar tests that they did was from the Channel Islands with the big Navy radar station, which belonged to Point Mugu Naval Base, and they looked down on Sea Shadow in the water. The first tests were done, and certainly the vehicle essentially disappeared.
But there was a problem.
So if you're designing a stealth boat, it's very different to if you're designing a stealth plane. When you fire radar at the sea, every single wave is a little face that you can bounce your radar off. So the sea to radar looks like a big sort of fuzz. And if you take a stealth ship and you drop it into the middle of that, it's a black hole.
So when we looked down from a cliff top using the big Point Mugu Navy radars on our ship, we were able to identify it because it disappeared when all the rest of the sea was visible.
Sea Shadow's invisibility had become her liability. She never got a chance to become an operational combat ship. The Navy moved on from the $195 million project. She did, however, provide invaluable information for the next generation of stealth ships.
The big legacy is that people are building stealth ships all over the world now.
Stealth ships are becoming really standard for a Navy's operations. They aren't drawing necessarily on that fighter plane technology of bouncing the signal away. What they're drawing on is radar absorbing technology. The idea is you don't disappear, you blend in. So your radar cross-section looks far more like something that should be there, like a fishing ship.
The US Navy sold Sea Shadow in 2012 on the condition she be scrapped. But her legacy lives on. Today, one vessel that bears a striking resemblance hopes to be as revolutionary as Sea Shadow was. In the 21st century, military superpowers find themselves facing small, unpredictable foes. Stealth combat ships have evolved to fight this asymmetric threat.
In 2000, the U.S. Cole was hit by terrorists, and 17 American sailors died in that attack in Yemen. After that attack, I started thinking about why the Navy doesn't have a high-speed protection boat, a gunship, to be able to protect their assets when they're in foreign countries. I quickly realized that it was a complex problem, and I started studying different boat designs.
After 4 years of research, 3 years of construction, and $22 million, Greg named the finished ship Ghost. This unique stealth ship has solved the issue that killed Sea Shadow. It no longer sticks out like a sore thumb on radar. How it does it is classified. Ghost is designed for a multitude of roles. For fleet force protection or anti-piracy operations, it can carry cannons or guided missiles like the Griffin or Spike to take out sea and land-based targets. Carries special sensors for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Or act as an assault vessel with room for 18 Navy SEALs. But versatility wouldn't mean much unless Greg could find a way to keep the boat steady in rough waters. A problem that plagued PT boats.
One of the biggest problems with patrol boats today is trying to fire any weapon systems off them. They're so unstable. You're moving so much, it's so hard to target.
Retired Navy veteran Cliff Bird knows the problem well.
So I was a naval special warfare combatant crewman. We pilot boats on the water, take them anywhere in the world. So any maritime interdiction, maritime operations is what we do.
In 2010, Cliff was called to a mission in stormy weather.
It was a bigger sea state day, so seas for probably about 8 to 10 feet. And we were running to do an interdiction of another vessel. I just got aboard a combat craft assault, a CCA. We came down off a wave and actually had my arm up on the console. And when it came down, I fractured my elbow and I blew all the brisket sacks basically in my elbow.
Cliff completed the mission, but the injury kept him out of commission for 3 weeks. Greg Sankoff wanted Ghost to solve this problem. His solution was an unusual-looking design shipbuilders call swath.
A swath is a small waterplane twin hull. That's what it stands for. A swath is actually running under the water, not on top of the water. When you have a vessel that runs on top of the water, if you have large waves, you're going to have a horrible ride. A swath rides below the water. So wave impacts don't matter to us that much because a wave impact can only hit the front of what we call our struts, which are very sharp, which cleanly cut the waves without putting a lot of force against the hull itself.
The result is a much smoother ride.
It's extremely different. In this boat, you could be in a bigger sea state of 6 to 8 feet and still have control in the cockpit and no G-shock.
There are downsides to the swath design. Its huge hulls sit low in the water, not ideal for operations close to shore.
Ghost addresses that particular deficiency by having reconfigurable hulls that allows it to settle out flat on the water. It's wide, kind of like a catamaran, but it can sit and actually operate in waters that are only 3.5 to 4 feet deep.
But the design poses another issue, drag. The resisting force of water against the hulls, which could impact Ghost's speed.
And I knew right away that I had to find a way to reduce the hull friction. And that led me to putting the propellers on the front of the design of the vessel. We're basically pulling the vessel through the water, not pushing it. And if you were pushing a vessel like this through the water, you could create structural problems with the vessel.
These frontal propellers also unlocked a revolutionary idea, one that would make Ghost the fastest swath ship on the ocean. The key is a phenomenon called cavitation.
Cavitation itself is simply changing water, like boiling it, except that you're just changing the pressure, not the temperature.
Fast-moving propellers create areas of lower pressure on their blades, causing the water to boil at ambient temperature. This creates a trail of vapor bubbles, or foam.
What we're doing is we're creating underwater foam tunnels with the front of the propellers. So we're flying through foam that's less dense than water, which gives us much better efficiency.
Just behind the propellers are a set of rings with tiny holes. These use funneled air from the surface to create additional microbubbles, completely encasing the 60-foot hulls in foam. The result, even less drag and a faster combat ship. Ghost has a top speed of 45 miles per hour, a world record for swaths.
I am invigorated by science completely. I love it. I love doing stuff that other people haven't done before.
Fast, stable, and stealthy, Ghost is a truly innovative combat ship. Modern high-tech radar and detection equipment means that no Navy can afford to fall behind on stealth technology. But even when this technology wasn't available, daring sailors used stealth tactics to hide and conduct covert missions that had a lasting impact on the history of naval warfare. Stealth technology will always need a sailor's combat skill to succeed.
The sea is a terrible place to try and hide. And what stealth does is it gives you another tool in your toolkit to disappear, to blend in, to be invisible, to reduce your presence and appear far less threatening at sea. But it has to become part of tactics, because stealth is nothing without the right tactics.